Love, light, and blessings. This is Shamanic Arak Priestess. Oh, this shaking stuff. What is that? I apologize, but I'm getting motion sickness here. Okay. So, today's video, this is my second video of the day, I know, but I have to take advantage of the quiet moments that I have when there's no kids running around or rugrats going on in the background or the little one trying to get in the videos, which I don't mind, but sometimes it's nice for mom to have a quiet moment. Anyway, so this video is about February. Happy Black History Month. Um, yes. So for those that are new to my channel, for those that know me already, they're gonna know what I'm gonna say. But for those that are new to my channel, I'm saying Happy Black History Month. Yes, Black History Month should be every month, but anyways. I've been thinking a lot of things in the month of February about that. And I wanted to make this separate from my favorites video because this is a whole separate topic. I've been watching a lot of movies. Like last year at this time, they have the New Roots in the History Channel. So I've watched I love the original, but I love the new one too. It just feels very authentic. I love watching the story. Yes, I cry a lot. It's very powerful. No matter how many times I've seen the movie, I cry a lot. I watched the other day with my daughter. Well, that one I did not watch with her. I watched it by myself. We did discuss the roots. And then I also watched 12 Years a Slave. That movie, I couldn't even watch it with my daughter. It's just my oldest daughter, even her, because it's just, oh my goodness, very powerful. But I don't know if I'll ever watch it again because there's just some parts to that movie that I'm like, oh my God. So I've been watching movies like that. I've been watching movies. We watched Malcolm X the other day. I love Malcolm X. So, and you know, and X, the one that yeah. So I've been watching all those movies and things like that. You know, really trying to get into. I'm not gonna say celebrating because it's not really celebrating, but giving my children that awareness of Black History Month. Yes. So I know that some people that don't know me might be saying, but you're Spanish, right? You're Puerto Rican. What are you talking about, Black History Month? Um, there are Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico that are direct descendants, not just of the Taino Indians, because yes, a lot of people claim Taino, Huepa, Arawak, and that's great, and it's true. The first inhabitants of Puerto Rico were the Taino, the Arawak, the Borinqueños. There's a resurgence of that movement going on now. A lot of people are reclaiming their Taino heritage, and they are getting state recognition, and the U.S. Congress recognized them as a tribe. They don't have federal recognition yet, but they're getting there, and Puerto Rico is starting to recognize them as an indigenous group as well. But that's not what I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about the fact that there are many Puerto Ricans, whether they want to identify with that or not, okay, and of course, so in other parts of the Caribbean as well, that are and have African descent. And so Black History Month for me is also very relevant. Even though I am not a Black American, I was, you know what I mean? I am African descent from the Caribbean. And yes, we do speak Spanish. But for the most part, a lot of African or Afro-Caribbean people don't really consider themselves Spanish. Spanish is the language they speak because in the Caribbean, slavery was done by the Spaniards, in some places the Portuguese, and in some places the French. So you speak the language of the group of people who oppressed you. They lost their language. For the most part, a lot of Puerto Ricans are from the tribe of Yoruba. Some may have ancestry in the Dahomey tribe. I know a lot more people have descendancy from the Dahomey tribe. And I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, so I apologize if I'm not. Usually in Haiti, so they usually have more of that Dahomey tribe ancestry, but all from Africa. This month has been very significant. I did an ancestry months and months ago when I first started my channel. And my mother is a very African looking woman. Um, that's one of the reasons I wanted to do ancestry, because I wanted to find out more about her lineage. I knew that I had Taino in me. I have her Arawak name, but I wanted to find out more about my African side, what tribes I had, and I was very satisfied with that. My daughter had an assignment the other day, and they wanted her to do an assignment about how she got her last name. How did she get her last name? How come your family has such and such last name? Our last name is actually sorry. Our last name is actually French. My maiden name is actually French. How do you have a French name in a Caribbean island and you speak Spanish? How do you have a French origin name when you come from Puerto Rico? Growing up in Puerto Rico, I came here at 5. Race wasn't something I mean, yeah, some people were prejudiced, but it wasn't something that was really talked about too much in that sense. I mean, you hear things behind la raza, that kind of stuff, but it wasn't, I don't know, it wasn't something that, if you're Puerto Rican, you're Puerto Rican, right? So you wouldn't say like I'm black Puerto Rican or I'm white Puerto Rican or I'm Italian Puerto Rican. You're just Puerto Rican. Puerto Rican first, race second, right? And in most places, Caribbean places and things like that are like that. They'll just say I'm Jamaican or I'm Trinidadian. Or usually you won't say I'm black Trinidadian or I'm Asian. Like you wouldn't say that. So, and I know here people would say like Native American, Puerto Rican American, Cuban American, Italian American. But in other places, they usually put the country first, not the race, right? So race wasn't something that I even really thought about until I got older. I moved to Staten Island and I was called the N word. And I moved into a different demographic neighborhood, or when I moved to a different part of Pennsylvania that was more rural and I started hearing certain terms. I'm not going to get into the terms because it's not important, but that's when I started to realize I was a teenager, oh, I'm different. I had an experience once. I was 19. I was working for McDonald's. I went to pick up my paycheck. I wanted to exchange it because it came in a paper check, and I wanted to get it in cash. And I didn't. That day the bank was closed, and I knew one of the managers in that particular McDonald's, and my sister knew him too, my older sister, because I got the job from her. I was working 2 jobs in high school. That's just the life of a poor migrant in New York City, in the Bronx, right? So I went to exchange. I'm sorry, not the Bronx. At that time, I was in Staten Island. Correction. I went to exchange my check, and my mom brought us to Staten Island because she thought it would be a better life. I grew up in the South Bronx for the most part, so my mom eventually ended up moving to Staten Island. So I went to exchange my check. I left that McDonald's, and there's a big parking lot between that McDonald's and the Central Mall, the big mall in Staten Island, the Staten Island Mall. There's a big parking lot between that plaza. I don't know if that's still there, but there was like a McDonald's there. There was a Toys R Us there, and then a huge parking space, and then the main plaza. Why am I telling you this story? I promise I'm going to get to the point. So while I was eating, I noticed these 2 guys in the McDonald's, once I got my money and everything. They kept staring at me, but it was a very creepy stare. And they had shaven heads, like army fatigue pants, and black combat boots. And I'm like, why did they keep staring at me? Why did they keep staring at me? So, and I noticed like certain tattoos, but I didn't really think anything of it. I was very ignorant then to a lot of stuff. I'm going to be honest. So, whatever. So I went and left. As I was leaving the McDonald's, okay, they were in their car. And they called me in the most nastiest, in the most malicious way. They called me the N-word. And it was the way they said it. And I'm going to try not to get emotional, okay? I know that was a long time ago, but... And I don't remember ever being so scared, because they were literally driving their car slow and trying to like block me from passing. And I went around the car and I was like just running, and I could hear them laughing. And that parking lot seemed like such an endless walk, because a lot of it I was in shock. Like, did they just call me that? So I start running, and even as we're getting into the mall, like you still have to go through another parking lot. you know, because it's pretty big mall, so there's so much space between the parking lot and the mall. Even when I got to the other side, and they're still chasing me and yelling stuff. And there wasn't really anybody there in the mall that day because of the hours that I went. It was like a weird time of the day, so it was pretty desolate, that parking lot. And they just kept calling me the N-word. And I usually am a very big mouth, New York, Bronx, Puerto Rican that will tell you about yourself. I'm not scared of you. I will do what I gotta do. But even I didn't say anything. I was just so scared and so afraid that they were going to, you know, I'm very psychic, I'm very intuitive, and I felt like if I would have engaged in an argument with them, they would have probably put me in that car, gang raped me, and I never would have been found, you know? So the best that I did was run and scream, fire, 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 until people started coming out of the mall, and they drove away because I drew attention to myself. That is not the first incident I've had. You know, I come to realize, you know, years later, they were skinheads. I've never met a skinhead before that. I didn't know what that was. I didn't even know what the KKK was. To be honest, I didn't know a lot about Black history. You know, I didn't know until I went to college that there was African ancestry in Puerto Rico. That was something I never learned in school about the slavery in the Caribbean. I never learned that. I learned about the Taino Indians. I learned that Christopher Columbus discovered the Caribbean, but I never learned about the African part of my culture. Um, that was a turning point when I went to college, because I was going to college that following summer. That made me want to study minority history. And I started focusing a lot on Puerto Rican history and learning about my history. And there was very limited books on that. I found a good book. If anybody's interested, I can make a video about that too. What books? I went to the Library of Congress and read slave manuscripts. I was like, oh my God, there was slavery in the Caribbean. I didn't know that. Not everybody knows that. And when my daughter did her project, which I'm getting back to that now, um, it really hit me. It reminded me of that incident, because it's one thing to know you come from slaves, or that your last name was attained because of slavery. It's another thing when you're doing a history project like that to actually have, I'm not going to say the privilege, because not a privilege, but to actually be able to access those records. And we were able to trace back as far as 1830, when one of my ancestors, she was a child at the time. They didn't make any mention of her parents in the transcripts, but she was a child at the time. You know, they wrote them into the books. I'm not going to say her name on here to respect her, but she originated from Africa. So I was able to trace a direct relative that came from Africa. And she was able to be free. Okay, so she was able to be free. They were freed in Puerto Rico. Slavery ended in 1872, and they did slave registries. Okay, and she was like 40 something when she was freed. But looking at the paper, the way they described her skin color and her features and the language they used, it just made me cry, because had some of us been born a couple of 100 years ago, that could be us. Sold, ripped from our homeland, ripped from our children, because during her time of slavery, and I only know of one child, you know, she may have had others. One of the parents of my great grandmother, her father was the child of that woman. So that was her father. And he was a mulatto. So, and there was no father in his slave transcript. And so I'm assuming that was non-consensual. So most likely she got raped by one of her owners at the time. And you know, he was able to see freedom too. He was able to marry and have my great grandmother. But then they went through a period of racism even after that. I mean, in her birth certificate alone, in my great great grandmother's birth certificate, she's mentioned as a female live mulatto child because through her mother's side, she was Native American. Okay. And her parents weren't even listed on any documentations because, yes, there was people at that time, the Tainos did not die. They mixed up with the Spaniards, not by choice. So she was a mixed native, and they did not list her parents, but she was property because she was considered colored. And when she became free, they had a child and they were not allowed to be listed in the birth certificate. So she was just a female mulatto child. And 1890 something, she was born. I don't remember the year offhand. Then after Puerto Rico got occupied by the United States in 1898, because they did, we were not freed from the Spaniards because for 50 years, Spain kind of, pretty much as long as you swore alliance to the crown in Spain and they emancipated the slaves and everything, they said you could rule yourself. Just pay your taxes, do. And for 50 years, Puerto Rico did rule itself. That's a very little known fact. You can look it up. I can cite some sources from that if you want on another video, and I'll show you the books and things that I did research on. So you don't think I'm just saying my opinion. So once they got taken over by the United States, and I'm not going to get into that. Some people want statehood, some people want liberty. I'm not really going to get into the status quo, and I live outside the island, so that's not what this video is about. I'm just stating historical facts. So once the United States occupied Puerto Rico, for better or for worse, they did a census in the early 1900s. And I got to see those documentations too. And so my great-grandmother, I saw when she had my great-grandmother in there amongst her other children, because she had other children, and she was unmarried. And her child was also a product of rape. My great-grandmother worked as a domestic servant for the white elites, okay? And they conceived my great-grandmother, and she wasn't allowed to put that man in the birth certificate. So she had to put that she was a single woman. So being that my great-grandmother was considered what they would say like a bastard in those times, she wasn't able to marry. She was also a mixed race person. So when she was younger, at the age of 13, she had something called a consensual contract. So she became a concubine for a white raced man. And she took on that last name, right? Because when the relatives I was talking about became free, usually in the slave manuscripts, they only had a name. I know in the United States, some of them don't even have a name. They just have male, age, but they did have a first name they would put on the slave manuscripts, but no last name. The last names they usually had would be the names they would take on from when they were freed from the masters and things like that. But anyway, so she was never allowed to marry. He had a wife of a white Spanish race as well. And she was always like the other woman. We didn't know that until we started researching our ancestry in my family. We thought they were legally married. We didn't know that, no, they weren't. He did give her a modest house where he kept her and the other 9 children that they had together. His children, when they did the census, were classified as white, like their father. Even though we come to find out he wasn't really white, he was white passing. She was put on the census as a mulatto, illiterate. A lot of my family members were illiterate. They weren't allowed to learn how to read. They had to sharecrop. They had to do what they had to do to survive. So they didn't have time for education. A lot of people couldn't even afford to feed their children. It's why some of them were forced to enter into these consensual contracts. That's how my great grandmother got pregnant from my great grandmother. She was a domestic servant. One of the owners of that home took advantage of her. What was she supposed to do as a woman of color at that time? I feel like she could go to the police and say, this guy did this to me. She had to quietly have her baby and most likely get fired from her employment, you know? Um, and so, you know, they had, like I said, 9 beautiful children. And from those children, you know, they had my grandmother. And she was the first one in the 1930s when she was born. And by the time she got married in the 1940s, almost 1950s, she was the first one that actually got to legally marry a man and have children in wedlock. She was allowed to do that. And I found out that, yeah, so, and she was able to be literate and read and have more rights than had her own mother had and her great grandmother of the same family, because my grandmother was considered white raced. And that's why some people, even if they were just passing, they'd rather classify themselves as white. Because there was no race in the censuses before until the United States occupied. They wrote down what they thought you were. And I have a problem with that to this day, because I feel like sometimes they say that's for services and stuff, but I feel like sometimes that's a disservice. Okay? I don't think that's necessary, but that's another video. So that's why that became so relevant. I started thinking about that and reading these manuscripts and reading this government documents and reading these census and doing this genealogy and doing this family tree this month has been so eye-opening, because had I been born even in the 1930s, what would my life have been? My children are mixed children. My youngest daughter's father is a white German, okay? Blonde hair, blue eyes. And had I been born in the 1900s, in the late 1800s, or even in the 1950s, would I have been able to openly love this man? Would he have been legally able to claim our daughter? Would I have to have settled for never being his wife, but being his concubine? Having a legal arrangement to love them, to be with the man that I love. And so no matter what's going on today with the government and everything like that, I feel so blessed to be around at this time, because that story doesn't make me sad. Those stories make me proud, because my Native American ancestors, my African ancestors survived. Somehow she survived slavery and got to see herself be emancipated. Somehow her son got to survive slavery and create a family and keep our bloodline going. And yeah, my name may have come from slavery. Because yes, there were some French people in Puerto Rico too. There were European settlers that eventually came and owned land and slaves. That doesn't hinder me, but that makes me strong. And that makes me proud to claim my black side. That makes me proud to claim my Native American side. Yes, I am Puerto Rican, but I'm also mixed race. That makes me stronger when I follow my spiritual path. This weekend, when my daughter's friend was over, they wanted a spiritual bath, and I created one that great grandmother that I was talking about, that was a domestic servant. It's a recipe that was passed on to her by her parents, her Native mom, as a matter of fact, her mixed Native mom. And I was able to get that recipe from my mother recently and give that spiritual bath to my children. And though that may seem like a simple thing, I am so much more grateful for the tradition that survived. It makes me so much more knowing that I'm in the right path, in the right spiritual path. I thank you so much for watching this video. And I want you to know, to all my brothers and sisters, and this is not just a video about my beautiful African American and African descent brothers and sisters out there. This is also a video of for everybody, because there's people out there who feel shame because their parents, like their family owned slaves. And yes, there was black slaves, free people that owned black slaves too. But I have a friend, she's like, I hate talking about slavery because like I know that my white family owned slaves, and it just makes me so shameful. And I tell her all the time, you didn't do that. You didn't own the slaves. You didn't own the slaves. And you work to be not a prejudiced person, and you work to be a good person. You know what I mean? So this is not a video about bashing anybody whose family owns slaves or anything like that. That's not what this is about. This video is about being proud, because I feel like sometimes when people discover they have slavery in their family, there's a shame that goes with that. And I look at it in a different way. I look at it as those people survived under some horrendous conditions when they weren't even thought of as people. They were thought of, even after they were emancipated, as 1/3 of a citizen. And they weren't allowed to vote. And they lived in segregation in the United States. There was segregations in other parts of the world too. And colorism. The Jivaros also separated from the African descendants, not treated as good as the white elites, but still better than those darker skinned people. So there is colorism even in my community and in many communities. But at the end of the day, we're surviving. At the end of the day, we're all one. And at the end of the day, we've come a long way. And at the end of the day, we're going to continue to come a long way. We're not going to go back into the darkness. We're not going to go back into these race wars and this way they're trying to separate us. We're just going to keep moving forward, and this nation's going to heal, and this nation's going to unite itself. And I really believe that by the time my children grow up, it's going to be so much better. I always tell my children, because I have mixed children. Okay, my 3 older children's father is a white Spanish descent man. So my children technically are mixed race, and they're lighter than me. And I always try to tell them that they're beautiful, to own each and every part of themselves, to know that each and every one of them were made with love, because they were. And at the time that those relationships were going, when I was married, when I was engaged to my youngest daughter's father, there was true love there. And love does not see color, does not see age. Love does not see any of those things. Children aren't born seeing certain things. Unfortunately, sometimes the parents are the ones that teach them that. So as you hear my daughter woke up, I'm going to end this video. Sorry for my little rant. Well, I don't really say rant because I'm not angry. I wanted to just make a chit chat. It was about that, happy Black History Month, and how through slavery, it was a horrible thing, but a lot of African descent ancestors kept their religion going through hoodoo, santeria, Lucimi honor, candomblé, ocha, and just many different African traditional religious practices were able to keep their religion alive, even if they had to infuse it in Catholic saints or use the Bible. They kept their religion going. And there were Black Muslims here too. They were part of the slave trade. And somehow they kept their religion going. So I wanted to give time to thank and honor these ancestors that came before us and paved the way for us to have the freedom that we have. Is it perfect? No. But I think some of us have accomplished things that our ancestors had never even imagined were possible. And let's continue to move forward and accomplish even more things so that our future generations could look up to us and say, if they can do that, we can do this. And just keep improving it over time. Much love, light, and blessings. Thank you so much for watching this video. And until the next video, guys, I love you. Please like and subscribe and tell me, what do you do for Black History Month?